The bride's parents ridiculed the groom's father because of his humble occupation, deeming him unworthy. However, when he unveiled his gift to the newlyweds, the guests fell silent in shock. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching this video from. The day had finally come, a day laden with the weight of love, unity, and the inevitable clash of worlds. Michael stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. The reflection staring back revealed a young man determined to build a future with the woman he loved, yet haunted by the shadow of her family's disdain. His rich brown skin shimmered under the early morning light streaming through the window, a stark reminder of the obstacles he had faced and might face again today. Michael's fiancée, Olivia, was everything he had ever dreamed of: kind, compassionate, and unfailingly supportive. She had stood by him through every challenge, defending their love against the subtle and not so subtle objections of her family. Yet as much as she loved Michael, she could not entirely dismiss the prejudice deeply ingrained in her parents, Robert and Linda, and the rest of their affluent, predominantly white family. Today, they were to meet Michael's father, Samuel, for the first time, and Michael could feel the tension tightening like a noose around his chest. Samuel had always been a man of quiet dignity. A custodian by trade, he had worked relentlessly to raise Michael on his own after the untimely death of his wife. Despite his modest means, Samuel carried himself with a grace that belied the hardships he had endured. To Michael, his father was a hero, the man who had instilled in him the values of hard work, humility, and integrity. Yet Michael knew all too well how people like Robert and Linda would judge his father. The wedding venue was a sprawling country estate, the kind that screamed wealth and exclusivity. When Michael and Samuel arrived, stepping out of the modest sedan that Samuel had polished the night before, they were greeted by a spectacle of luxury. Gleaming cars lined the driveway, and impeccably dressed guests mingled, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. Samuel adjusted his simple yet well-pressed suit, his weathered hands smoothing the fabric as he surveyed the scene with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Michael noticed the subtle glances cast their way and the hushed whispers that trailed behind them as they made their way to the main entrance. "Just remember," Michael murmured softly as he leaned toward his father, "no matter what happens, you're the reason I'm standing here today. None of this would have been possible without you." Samuel offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'm here for you, Michael. This is your day." Inside, the contrast between the two families was stark. Robert and Linda stood at the center of a group of guests, exuding an air of superiority that seemed contagious. Linda's sharp eyes immediately locked onto Samuel, scrutinizing him from head to toe with a critical glare. Robert, tall and imposing, approached with an overly polite smile that never quite reached his eyes. "You must be Samuel," Robert said as he extended his hand. "I've heard so much about you." Samuel shook his hand firmly. "And you must be Robert. It's a pleasure to meet you." Linda interjected in a tone dripping with condescension. "We've been so curious about Michael's family. Tell us, what do you do for a living?" Samuel met her gaze without flinching. "I work as a custodian. It's honest work, and it has provided for my son and me." A palpable silence fell over the group. Robert's smile faltered and Linda's expression twisted into something resembling pity, though laced with disdain. "Well," she said finally, "it's certainly admirable to work hard for one's family," her carefully chosen words unmistakably condescending. Michael clenched his fists at his sides, his jaw tightening as he watched his father endure their veiled insults with unwavering composure. At that moment, Olivia appeared a beacon of calm amid the storm of tension. She greeted Samuel warmly, her genuine smile cutting through the pretense of the gathering. "I'm so glad you're here, Samuel," she said, taking his hand in hers. "You've raised an incredible son." Samuel's smile softened. "Thank you, Olivia. That means a lot to hear." As the evening unfolded, the divide between the two families became increasingly evident. The lavish decor, expensive menu, and designer outfits all underscored the disparity between Samuel's humble upbringing and the opulence of Olivia's world. Yet Samuel remained steadfast, his quiet dignity a sharp contrast to the arrogance of Robert and Linda. He engaged politely with the guests, answering their probing questions about his background with honesty and grace, even as the whispers grew louder. "Did you hear? He's just a custodian," one guest murmured to another. "I can't believe Olivia is marrying into that family," another remarked, her voice dripping with disdain. Michael absorbed every word, anger simmering beneath the surface. Yet whenever he looked at his father standing tall and unshaken amidst the scrutiny, he felt a surge of pride. As the night drew to a close, Robert and Linda exchanged a knowing glance and approached Samuel, their smiles as insincere as ever. "Samuel, we appreciate you coming today. It must be overwhelming being in a setting like this," Robert began. "Yes," Linda added, "it's not every day one gets to experience such refinement." Samuel met their gazes evenly. "It's certainly a different world," he said calmly, "but what truly matters isn't the setting, it's the people." For a moment, Robert and Linda appeared taken aback by his response, though their composure soon returned. "Well," Robert said, forcing a chuckle, "I suppose we all come from different walks of life." As they turned to leave, Michael stepped forward and placed a protective hand on his father's shoulder. "You don't have to do this, Dad," he said softly. Samuel shook his head. "This is your day, Michael. I want to let their ignorance ruin it." Throughout the wedding day, the tension escalated, setting the stage for a confrontation that would reveal the true character of everyone involved. The grand dining hall shone under the glow of crystal chandeliers, its tables adorned with pristine white linens and arrangements of fresh lilies. Guests took their seats amid the clinking of fine china and hushed murmurs of anticipation. Despite the opulent surroundings, a palpable tension hung in the air like a brewing storm. Michael and Samuel entered the room together, their presence drawing the immediate attention of Olivia's family and friends. The whispers resumed, slicing through the air with the weight of judgment. Samuel, ever composed, followed Michael to their assigned table near the front of the room, where Olivia's parents, Robert and Linda, were already seated. Their expressions were carefully neutral, yet their stiff postures and averted glances betrayed their discomfort. Olivia sat by their side, her warm smile a stark contrast to her parents' frosty demeanor. She gestured for Samuel to sit beside her as everyone settled in. Clearing his throat, Robert's voice cut through the murmurs. "Before we begin, I'd like to welcome you all to this special occasion. Tonight we celebrate not only the union of Olivia and Michael, but also the merging of two families." He paused, glancing briefly at Samuel. "Though we come from different walks of life, I hope we can find common ground." His diplomatic remark carried an undercurrent of condescension. Samuel simply nodded, his face unreadable, while Michael bristled beside him. Soon, the servers began circulating, placing artfully arranged dishes before the guests. Conversation resumed, only for the focus to return to Samuel. "Samuel," Linda began lightly but with an edge that suggested she was fishing for a reaction, "Michael mentioned that you've worked tirelessly to support him, that's admirable. But what exactly do you do?" Samuel placed his fork down and met her gaze with quiet confidence. "I'm a custodian. I've been one for most of my life." His words hung in the air, followed by an uncomfortable silence. Linda's perfectly arched eyebrows lifted in a display of feigned surprise, while Robert leaned forward with a tight smile. "A custodian, you say? That's certainly a noble profession," he said with insincerity. "It must be fulfilling to know you've done your part, even in such humble circumstances." Michael's hand tightened around his glass, the sound of his knuckles cracking barely audible. Olivia rested a gentle hand on his arm, though her own frustration was evident in the flush of her cheeks. Samuel remained unruffled. "It's honest work," he replied evenly. "It has allowed me to raise my son and give him the opportunities he needed to succeed. I wouldn't trade it for anything." Linda tilted her head, her lips curling into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Of course, and now look at Michael, a testament to your hard work." Although I imagine Olivia's influence has polished him a bit, she chuckled lightly, glancing around for validation. A few guests exchanged amused looks, but Michael's expression darkened. "It isn't about polishing," he said tersely. "It's about character, and that is something my father taught me better than anyone." Samuel gently placed a hand on Michael's arm to signal calm. "Thank you, son," he said softly, then turned back to Linda. "Character is often overlooked, but it truly defines a person." The conversation shifted briefly, yet the tension remained as the main course was served. An older gentleman, with a commanding presence, leaned forward and asked, "Forgive my curiosity, Samuel, but how does a custodian raise a son who has achieved so much? It must have been challenging." Samuel nodded unflinchingly. "It was, but challenges shape us. I taught Michael to face them with integrity and resilience, and he has made me proud every step of the way." The man replied in a neutral tone, though his expression was skeptical. "Still, I can't help but wonder, what exactly do you bring to this marriage? Surely you've thought about how you might contribute." Before Samuel could respond, Linda interjected with faux concern, "Oh, I'm sure Samuel has something planned. Of course, it's hard to compete with what we have provided." The implication was clear, and the table fell silent once more. Unable to contain herself any longer, Olivia spoke up. "Mom, that is enough. Samuel has already given Michael more than most parents ever could. Maybe we should be focusing on celebrating instead of." She hesitated, glancing around. "Instead of whatever this is." Linda's smile stiffened, and Robert waved a dismissive hand. Now, Olivia, we're merely trying to get to know Samuel. It's only natural to ask questions." As the meal continued, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. Every attempt by Samuel to participate was met with thinly veiled barbs or dismissive responses. Some guests, emboldened by Robert and Linda's behavior, began to join in their whispers. "Can you imagine a custodian at an event like this?" One woman murmured to her companion. "I wonder what he'll even give as a wedding present, maybe a mop." Michael heard every word, his temper nearly breaking, yet it was Samuel's unwavering composure that kept him grounded. His father's calm in the face of blatant disrespect filled Michael with pride. Finally, as dessert was served, Robert leaned back and addressed Samuel directly. "Well, Samuel, I suppose we'll soon see what kind of gift you brought for the happy couple. I'm sure it will be thoughtful." His remark drew chuckles from several guests, but Samuel merely smiled. "I believe gifts should carry meaning rather than a price tag," he said. "I hope it will be appreciated for what it represents." Robert opened his mouth to retort, but Olivia interrupted, "Enough, Dad. This is meant to be a celebration, not an interrogation." Linda raised her glass, forcing a laugh. "Oh, Olivia, we're just having a bit of fun." As the evening drew to a close, the tension simmered beneath the surface. Michael turned to his father, his voice low but firm. "I'm so sorry, Dad. They had no right to treat you like that." Samuel placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Don't apologize, Michael. They may have their opinions, but they don't define who I am or who you are. Remember that." As father and son walked toward the exit, leaving behind the opulent dining hall and the judgmental stares of its occupants, Michael felt a growing resolve. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew his father's steadfast strength and integrity would guide him through the night. The night lingered, thick with tension like a dense fog. The echoes of laughter and whispered judgments from the dinner table followed Michael and Samuel as they moved toward the terrace, seeking respite from the oppressive atmosphere inside the grand hall. The shimmering chandeliers and polished silverware had begun to feel less like a celebration and more like a battlefield. Samuel's measured steps carried him across the marble floor with shoulders squared, but Michael could see the weariness in his father's eyes, not just from the long evening or the barrage of subtle insults, but from a lifetime spent enduring similar treatment over and over again. Michael closed the terrace door behind them, muffling the chatter and music. The cool night air offered a brief reprieve, yet it did little to calm the storm inside him. "Dad, I don't know how you do it," Michael said, his voice tight with frustration. "They disrespected you all night, and you just took it." Leaning against the stone railing and gazing out over the manicured gardens illuminated by flickering lanterns, Samuel replied evenly, "I didn't take anything. I chose not to give them the reaction they wanted." Michael shook his head. "But why? Why not stand up to them? Let them know they can't talk to you like that." Samuel turned to face his son, his expression calm yet resolute. "Because tonight isn't about me, it's about you and Olivia. If I let them drag me into an argument, it would have ruined everything. I want to let their ignorance take that away from you." Michael opened his mouth to respond, but then the terrace door swung open and Olivia stepped out, her face etched with concern. "There you are," she said softly. "I was worried when you both left." Michael took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We just needed a break." Olivia's gaze shifted to Samuel. "I'm so sorry about my parents. I knew they'd be difficult, but I didn't think they'd be this cruel." Samuel offered a small smile. "It's not your fault, Olivia. It's nothing I haven't faced before." Tears glistened in Olivia's eyes. "But it isn't right. I hate how they made you feel, how they made me feel. I wanted tonight to be perfect, but they showed you who they really are." Interrupting gently, Samuel said, "Now you have a choice. What matters most is how you respond." Before Olivia could reply, the terrace door opened again, this time revealing Robert, his towering frame silhouetted against the warm indoor light. With a forced smile, he said, "Ah, there you are. I thought we might have lost you, Olivia. We're about to start the toasts. You should come inside." Olivia hesitated, looking back at Samuel and Michael. "I'll be there in a minute," she replied. Robert's eyes flicked to Samuel. "Perhaps you'd like to say a few words as well? It might help everyone get to know you better." Michael bristled at the condescension behind his words, but Samuel simply nodded. "I'd be honored," he said. Robert's smile sharpened. "Good. We'll be waiting." Once Robert had departed, Olivia let out a frustrated sigh. "He is not asking you to speak because he cares about what you have to say," she murmured. Samuel's smile was faint but reassuring. "Let him try." Moments later, they returned to the hall where glasses were raised and conversation dimmed. As Robert tapped his fork against his champagne flute, he began, "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate this wonderful occasion. It is not every day that two families come together in such a meaningful way." He paused, his eyes landing on Samuel. "I think it is only fitting that we hear a few words from Michael's father, Samuel, the man who raised the groom and helped shape him into the man we see before us today." Samuel rose slowly, and the room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "Thank you, Robert, and thank you all for welcoming my son and me tonight. I know our backgrounds are different, but I believe this union is proof that love can bridge any divide." A few guests smiled politely, while others exchanged knowing glances, clearly expecting him to falter. Yet Samuel's tone remained unwavering. "I have spent my life working hard not for recognition or wealth, but to give my son a chance at a better future. I may not have achieved success measured in dollars, but I have succeeded in raising a man who values integrity, kindness, and perseverance. Tonight, I could not be prouder to see him standing beside the woman he loves." For a brief moment, a ripple of genuine applause filled the room. But Robert was not finished. "That is a beautiful sentiment," he said, standing once more. "I am sure Michael appreciates everything you've done for him, but I must ask, what kind of example do you think you're setting? After all, success isn't just about values, it's also about ambition. Don't you think Michael deserves a family that can offer more than humility?" The room fell silent again, the tension sharper and more dangerous this time. Samuel looked directly into Robert's eyes and smiled. "I believe Michael deserves a family that understands the difference between humility and weakness," he replied. "Humility is not about thinking less of yourself, it's about thinking of others more. Tonight, I see two people who have built their relationship on love, respect, and understanding, and that is more than I can say for some." The room shifted uneasily, and Linda quickly rose, raising her glass in a toast to the happy couple. The guests echoed her gesture, yet the mood had shifted. Samuel's words lingered, leaving an undercurrent of discomfort and reflection. As the evening progressed, Michael could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. His father had faced the storm with grace, but the battle was far from over. Glancing at Olivia, who stood defiantly beside him, Michael knew that together they would face whatever came next. The night pressed on, with the weight of Samuel's words echoing like aftershocks. The clinking of glasses and forced laughter rang hollow in the face of simmering tension. Samuel remained at the table, his expression calm but guarded, while Michael sat beside him, shoulders taut with restrained anger. Olivia hovered close, her presence a silent reassurance against the storm swirling around them. Across the room, Robert and Linda regrouped with their friends. Their hushed voices carried faint echoes of indignation, Linda's eyes darting towards Samuel every few seconds, as if waiting for him to falter, while Robert's gaze remained fixed and unyielding, like a predator awaiting the right moment to strike. Leaning closer, Michael whispered, "I don't trust him." "He has not finished yet," Samuel replied softly. "Let him say what he wants. Truth has a way of shining through, no matter how much they try to bury it." Before Michael could respond, Robert rose from his seat and strode toward their table, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. The surrounding conversations faded as his eyes locked onto Samuel, his curiosity and anticipation stirring among the guests. "If I may," Robert began, his tone measured as if accustomed to command, "there is something I have been meaning to ask you all evening." Samuel turned to face him, expression unreadable. "Of course," Robert continued, clasping his hands behind his back in a stiff, deliberate posture. "You spoke earlier about hard work and values. While I respect that, I cannot help but wonder why a custodian, given your composure and your ability to speak with such conviction, would settle for cleaning floors." Samuel's eyes remained steady. "I did not settle," he corrected. "I made a choice to spend my life ensuring my son had food on the table and a roof over his head, a choice to teach him that no work is beneath a person." For a moment, Robert faltered, then recovered. "And what about your past? Surely there is more to your story than what you have shared tonight." The words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Samuel hesitated. Michael frowned, sensing his father's unease. "Dad?" Samuel drew a deep breath and stood, his gaze sweeping the room, before returning to Robert. "You want to know more about my past? Very well." The room hushed as Samuel began to speak. "I wasn't always a custodian. Before this, I served in the military. I enlisted as soon as I finished high school because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to protect the people I loved. And for a time I did. I served 2 tours overseas, witnessed things I would never wish on anyone, and those experiences changed me forever. But I kept going because I believed in what I was doing. I believed in this country." He paused, lowering his voice. Then I came home to a country that did not see me as a hero. It saw me as a black man, a man who could risk his life for freedom abroad, yet be treated as less than human at home. My medals and sacrifices meant nothing. All people saw was the color of my skin. Linda shifted uncomfortably, while Robert's jaw tightened. I tried to find work, Samuel continued, but doors kept closing. I swallowed my pride and took the first job that paid the bills. I became a custodian. Not because it was all I could do, but because it was what I had to do to make sure my son had a future. I did it not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to put my family first. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked down, ashamed, while others avoided Samuel's gaze altogether. Samuel paused before continuing, I stand here not as a man ashamed of my work, but as a man proud of what I have built, a son who is kind, intelligent, and successful. That is my legacy. A hesitant round of applause broke out, growing louder as more guests joined in. Michael stood proudly beside his father, his chest swelling with pride, while Olivia wiped away tears of admiration. But Robert's face darkened as he raised a hand to silence the applause. That is quite a story, he said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. But forgive me if I find it a bit convenient. Convenient, or not, Samuel replied, his tone calm yet firm. I will not trade the values my parents instilled in me for money. I chose to keep this painting because it is more than art. It is a piece of my family's history, a reminder of our struggles and our triumphs. It is something no amount of wealth can ever buy. A stunned silence fell. Robert's voice rose in disbelief. You mean to tell me, Samuel, that you have had this fortune in your possession all these years? Samuel met his gaze evenly. Yes, he said, and despite that, I continue to work as a custodian. Robert's disbelief gave way to anger. You could have sold it and lived comfortably, could have, Samuel interrupted, voice calm but resolute. I abandoned the notion that money is more important than integrity. I chose to keep this painting because it represents my family's story, something that no price can ever measure. The room fell silent once more. This time, however, the whispers shifted from mockery to admiration. Guests murmured words like remarkable and inspiring. Even those who had laughed earlier now appeared uncertain, their expressions tinged with guilt. Linda stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the painting, as if hoping to change her opinion by merely looking at it. You mean to tell me, she said in a brittle voice, that you have been sitting on something this valuable without flaunting it to earn respect? Samuel cut in firmly, respect is not bought, Linda, it is earned. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words followed. Robert was not ready to relent. This doesn't change anything, he snapped. You are still a man who raised a son. You're clearly not good enough to deserve Olivia. Olivia interrupted sharply, and the room froze. You do not mean that, she said steadily. You have spent the entire night trying to tear Samuel down, and all you have shown me is how narrow-minded you are, and I refuse to let you ruin this day. Michael stepped forward, wrapping an arm around Olivia's shoulders. Neither will I, he declared firmly. For the first time that evening, Robert was at a loss for words. Linda tugged at his arm, her expression pleading, but he remained unmoved. Samuel placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder and said, This is not the time for anger, it is the time for truth. The room held its breath as Samuel turned back to Robert. You wanted to know who I am. Now you must ask yourself, can you live with that? Robert's face hardened, and he said nothing further. As the night wore on, the cracks in his carefully constructed world began to show. The air in the hall still trembled with the echoes of Samuel's revelation, and conversations resumed in hushed, uncertain tones, as if the weight of his story had permeated every corner. Samuel remained seated, his back straight and his expression calm but distant. Michael sat beside him, his jaw tight, as he caught fleeting glances of nervous looks and whispered comments. Olivia stood close, Her arm looped protectively through Michael S. as her eyes darted toward her parents, who huddled at the far end of the hall, their expressions a mix of indignation and disbelief. Linda S.'s hands trembled visibly, while Robert S.'s jaw was set, his eyes fixed on Samuel like a predator. "I don't trust him," Michael whispered, his voice low. "He has not done yet, I can feel it." Samuel replied quietly, "Let him say what he wants. Truth has a way of shining through, no matter how much they try to bury it." Before Michael could respond, Robert rose from his seat and strode purposefully toward their table, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. The conversations around them faded as his eyes locked onto Samuel. "If I may," Robert began, his tone calm yet commanding, "there is one question that has haunted me all evening." Samuel faced him, expression steady. "Of course," Robert continued, "you spoke of hard work and values, and while I respect that, I must ask, why does a man who has demonstrated such conviction choose a life of custodial work? Why not aim higher?" Samuel's eyes never wavered. "I did not settle for less. I made a choice to ensure my son had every opportunity, a choice to teach him that no work is beneath dignity." For the first time, Robert faltered, then pressed on, "But what about your past? Surely there is more to your story than tonight's narrative." The question hung heavily in the air. Samuel hesitated, and Michael frowned, sensing his father's discomfort. "Dad?" Samuel drew in a steadying breath and then spoke. "Before I became a custodian, I served in the military. I enlisted right after high school because I wanted to make a difference to protect the people I loved. I served 2 tours overseas, and I witnessed things that changed me forever. I did it because I believed in this country." He paused, his voice softening. "But when I returned home, I found a country that did not see me as a hero, but only as a black man, a man whose sacrifices were disregarded. My medals and my hardships meant nothing to them. All they saw was the color of my skin." Linda shifted uncomfortably, while Robert's jaw tightened. "I tried to find work," Samuel continued, "but doors kept closing. I swallowed my pride and accepted the first job that would support my family. I became a custodian not because I had no other option, but because I had a responsibility to ensure my son had food on the table and a roof over his head. I did what I had to do, not out of weakness, but out of strength." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, some looking down in shame, others avoiding his eyes. "I stand here tonight, not as a man ashamed of his labor, but as a man proud of what he has built, a son who is kind, intelligent, and successful. That is my legacy." A hesitant round of applause broke out and gradually grew louder as more guests joined in. Michael stood proudly at his father's side, his heart swelling with pride, while Olivia, wiping tears from her eyes, looked on with admiration. Yet Robert's face darkened, and he raised a hand to silence the applause. "That is quite the story," he said, his voice now lacking its earlier confidence. "But forgive me if I find it a bit convenient." Samuel frowned slightly. "Convenient or not," he replied firmly, "I will not compromise the values my parents instilled in me. I chose to keep this painting because it is more than art. It is a part of my family's history, a symbol of where we come from and what we have endured. It represents something no amount of money could ever purchase." A heavy silence followed. Robert's voice rose in disbelief. "You mean to tell me, Samuel, that you have held on to this fortune all these years?" Samuel met his gaze steadily. "Yes, and despite that, I continue to work as a custodian." Robert's disbelief gave way to anger. "You could have sold it and lived comfortably. You could have," Samuel interrupted calmly. "I rejected the notion that money is more important than integrity. I kept this painting because it tells my family's story, and that is priceless." The room fell silent again, but this time the mood shifted. The whispers, once mocking, became admiring murmurs. Guests exchanged words like remarkable and inspiring, and even those who had laughed earlier now appeared uncertain, their expressions tinged with guilt. Linda stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the painting as if searching for validation. "You mean to tell me," she said in a brittle voice, "that you have been sitting on something so valuable without flaunting it for respect?" Samuel interjected firmly, "Respect isn't purchased. Linda, it is earned." Her mouth opened, but no words followed. Robert, however, was not ready to relent. "This doesn't change anything," he snapped. "You raised a son, yet you're clearly not good enough to deserve Olivia." Olivia interrupted sharply, and the room froze. "You don't mean that," she declared, her voice steady. "You have spent the entire night trying to tear Samuel down, and all you have done is reveal how small-minded you truly are. I refuse to let you ruin this day." Michael stepped forward, wrapping an arm protectively around Olivia. "Neither will I," he stated. For the first time that evening, Robert appeared at a loss for words while Linda reached for him, pleading silently, but he did not budge. Samuel placed a hand on Michael's shoulder and said gently, "This is not a time for anger, it is a time for truth." The room fell into a heavy silence as Samuel turned back to Robert. "You wanted to know who I am," he said. "Now you must ask yourself, can you live with that?" Robert's face hardened, and though he said nothing further, the evening continued with the cracks in his carefully constructed world becoming ever more evident. The air in the hall trembled with the echoes of Samuel's revelation, and as conversations resumed in hushed, uncertain tones, it was clear that his story had left its mark. Samuel remained seated, his back straight, his expression calm but distant, while Michael sat beside him with a tightened jaw, catching glimpses of nervous stares and whispered comments. Olivia stood protectively close, her arm looped through Michael's, as her eyes darted toward her parents, who huddled in the far corner with expressions mixing indignation and disbelief. Linda's hands trembled visibly, while Robert's gaze fixed on Samuel like a predator stalking its prey. "I don't trust him," Michael whispered. "He has not finished, I can feel it." Samuel replied softly, "Let him speak. Truth always shines through, no matter how deeply they try to bury it." Before Michael could respond, Robert rose and strode purposefully toward their table, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. The surrounding conversations faded as his eyes fixed on Samuel, and the anticipation among the guests grew palpable. "If I may," Robert said, his tone calm yet commanding, "there is one question I have been meaning to ask you all evening." Samuel turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Of course," Robert continued, "you spoke of hard work and values. Yet, I still wonder, why does a man with such conviction choose to work as a custodian instead of aiming for more?" Samuel's eyes never wavered. "I did not choose less," he replied. "I made a choice to provide for my family, to ensure my son had every opportunity, and to teach him that no work is beneath dignity." For a moment, Robert hesitated before pressing on, "But what about your past? Surely, there is more to you than this story." The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Samuel paused. Michael frowned, sensing his father's unease. "Dad?" Samuel drew a deep breath and then spoke steadily. "Before I became a custodian, I served in the military. I enlisted immediately after high school because I wanted to make a difference, to protect the people I loved. I served 2 tours overseas, and I witnessed things that changed me forever. I did it because I believed in this country." He lowered his voice. "But when I returned home, I found that the country did not see me as a hero, it saw me as a black man, a man who risked everything for freedom abroad only to be treated as inferior at home. My medals and sacrifices meant nothing to them, they only saw the color of my skin." Linda shifted uncomfortably, while Robert's jaw tightened. "I tried to find work," Samuel continued, "but door after door closed. I swallowed my pride and took the first job available. I became a custodian. Not because it was all I could do, but because it was what I had to do to put food on the table and a roof over our heads. I did it not out of weakness, but out of strength and responsibility. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked down, ashamed, while others avoided his gaze. I stand here tonight not as a man ashamed of his labor, but as a man proud of what I have built, a son who is kind, intelligent, and successful. That is my legacy. A hesitant round of applause began, growing louder as more guests joined in. Michael stood proudly at his father's side, his chest swelling with pride, while Olivia, with tears in her eyes, gazed at him in admiration. But then Robert's face darkened, and he raised a hand to silence the applause. "That is quite the story," he said, his voice now lacking confidence. "But forgive me if I find it a bit convenient." Samuel frowned slightly. "Convenient or not," he replied firmly, "I will not compromise the values instilled in me by my parents. I chose to keep this painting because it is more than art. It is a part of my family's history, a reminder of our struggles and triumphs. It represents something that no amount of money can ever buy." A heavy silence followed. "You mean to tell me, Samuel, that you have held on to this treasure all these years?" Robert asked, disbelief in his tone. Samuel met his gaze steadily. "Yes, and even so, I continue to work as a custodian." Robert's tone shifted from disbelief to anger. "You could have sold it and lived comfortably. You could have," Samuel interrupted, his voice calm and firm. "But I rejected the idea that money is more important than integrity. I kept this painting because it tells my family's story, and that is priceless." The room fell silent once more, but now the mood had shifted. The whispers were no longer mocking but admiring. Guests murmured words like remarkable and inspiring, and even those who had laughed earlier now looked on with uncertainty, their expressions tinged with guilt. Linda stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the painting as if seeking validation. "You mean to tell me," she said in a brittle voice, "that you have been sitting on something so valuable without flaunting it for respect?" Samuel interjected firmly, "Respect isn't something you buy, it's something you earn." Her mouth opened, but no words followed. Robert, however, was not ready to concede. "This doesn't change anything," he snapped. "You raised a son, yet you're still not good enough to deserve Olivia." Olivia interrupted sharply, and the room froze. "You do not mean that," she said firmly. "You have spent the entire night trying to tear Samuel down, and all you have done is reveal how small-minded you truly are. I refuse to let you ruin this day." Michael stepped forward, placing an arm protectively around Olivia. "Neither will I," he stated clearly. For the first time that evening, Robert seemed lost for words. Linda reached for his arm in silent pleading, but he remained unmoved. Samuel placed a hand on Michael's shoulder and said, "This is not a time for anger, it is a time for truth." The room fell into a heavy silence as Samuel turned back to Robert. "You wanted to know who I am," he said. "Now you must ask yourself, can you live with that?" Robert's face hardened, and though he said nothing further, the evening continued with cracks in his carefully constructed world becoming ever more evident. The air in the hall trembled with the echoes of Samuel's revelation as conversations resumed in hushed, uncertain tones. Samuel remained seated, his back straight, his expression calm yet distant, while Michael sat beside him, his jaw tight as he caught glimpses of nervous stares and whispered comments. Olivia stood close, her arm protectively around Michael, her eyes darting toward her parents, who huddled at the far end of the hall with expressions of indignation and disbelief. Linda's hands trembled visibly, while Robert's gaze fixed on Samuel like a predator stalking its prey. "Do you think they'll ever change?" Olivia asked softly. Samuel studied her for a moment before answering, "Maybe. Change takes time, and not everyone is ready for it. But that doesn't mean you wait for them to catch up. You move forward and show them what is possible." Michael nodded, his jaw tightening. "If they don't change, then you keep building." Samuel said, "You build something better. That is the legacy you leave. Not what you inherit, but what you create." Olivia smiled, her hand tightening around Michael's. "I think we're ready for that." Samuel looked at them both, seeing the same strength he had always tried to instill in Michael, and he rose from his chair. Approaching the mantel where the painting hung, he gently brushed its frame. "This is a reminder of where we come from, of the struggles that shaped us, but the real legacy isn't on a wall. It's in the choices you make and the lives you touch. This painting is just a symbol. The true inheritance is what you build together." Olivia blinked back tears, and Michael stepped forward to pull his father into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Samuel patted his son's back. "You don't have to thank me, just make it count." For a long while, the three of them stood together, bound not just by blood, but by the strength of their choices and the unshakable foundation of love and respect. As the days stretched on, laughter began to fill the modest living room where plans for the future unfolded, dreams of a home, of children, of a life built on their own terms. And through it all, Samuel remained a steady presence, offering guidance but never interference. The painting still hung above the mantel, but it was no longer the centerpiece of their story. It had become a quiet reminder of where they had been, and a symbol of what they would continue to build together. As Samuel listened to Michael and Olivia discussing their plans and dreams, he knew his work was not finished. It had only just begun. Their legacy would be measured not in wealth or status, but in the values they held dear: love, loyalty, and the courage to stand up for what is right. And as he watched them, standing tall beneath the soft glow of the morning light streaming through the windows, Samuel felt truly free because he had seen his son embrace the values he had fought so hard to instill. Together, they stepped forward into a new beginning, leaving behind the echoes of the past and walking boldly toward a future built on the strength of their convictions. If you enjoyed this story, please support our channel by subscribing, clicking the bell to not miss new releases, and sharing this video with your friends and family. Thank you for being with us. It had been less than a year since that unforgettable wedding, one that had seen hearts both wounded and uplifted. In the soft glow of early autumn, when golden leaves drifted slowly to the pavement and the air hinted at crisp change, the lives of those entwined that day were about to be tested in unexpected ways. Robert had always carried himself with an air of unyielding confidence. In the world of high finance and luxury, he was regarded as a man who had achieved everything through a combination of shrewd business acumen and impeccable taste. Yet, even the mightiest of towers can tremble when an unexpected storm arrives. For months, Robert had maintained a facade of success. Publicly, he continued to host lavish dinners, attend exclusive events, and make bold statements about his next big venture. But behind closed doors, his company, once the darling of an upscale investment firm, was crumbling. A series of miscalculated decisions, market downturns, and an unforeseen scandal had stripped away much of its fortune. Now, with debts mounting and creditors calling relentlessly, Robert found himself on the very brink of bankruptcy. One crisp October evening, while he sat in his ornate, wood-paneled study, surrounded by relics of a once great legacy, Robert stared at the quarterly reports with disbelief. The numbers told a grim story of losses he could no longer ignore. The weight of his past arrogance pressed down on him as he realized that the empire he had built might soon vanish, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He exhaled slowly and picked up the phone. With shaking fingers, he dialed the number of his trusted financial advisor. But even as he waited for the connection, his mind reeled back to that wedding, the whispered insults, the proud dismissal of his wealth by those he considered beneath him. It was a memory he had fought to bury, yet now it loomed large. The irony was bitter. The very arrogance he had once flaunted now seemed to be his undoing. While Robert grappled with his mounting fears, halfway across town, Michael and Samuel were enjoying a quiet Saturday morning at the small cafe they had come to favor. Michael's hands were wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, and Samuel sat across from him, a gentle smile on his weathered face as he read the local newspaper. Their lives had gradually found a new rhythm since the wedding. The storm of that night still echoed in their hearts, but now it had settled into a memory of resilience and the promise of new beginnings. Michael had recently been promoted at his job, a testament to the character and determination his father had instilled in him. Samuel, meanwhile, continued to work as a custodian at the local high school, his quiet dignity admired by all who knew him. Their bond had only grown stronger in the intervening months, forged through shared hardships and the collective desire to build something lasting. As Michael sipped his coffee, he noticed an urgent message on his phone. It was from Olivia. With a frown, he opened it. The text was brief, yet laden with worry. "Dad, there's trouble at home. I need you to come to the office ASAP." His heart sank. The message hinted at problems beyond the usual domestic squabbles. It was a code that something was seriously amiss with her father's business, a matter that, if left unchecked, could have far-reaching consequences. Michael immediately excused himself from the cafe. "I'll be back soon," he told Samuel, who nodded knowingly. Samuel, having learned long ago that family was the most valuable asset of all, simply smiled and said, "Take care of them, son. I'll be right here if you need me." Within the hour, Michael found himself standing outside the gleaming glass facade of the company headquarters, a building that once symbolized Robert's power and prestige. Now, however, it loomed like a monument to uncertainty. The reception area was quiet, the polished floors gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights that did little to mask the tension in the air. Inside a cramped conference room, Olivia sat with her mother, Linda, poring over stacks of financial documents. Olivia's eyes were red from stress, and the usually composed Linda appeared defeated, her hands trembling as she attempted to balance spreadsheets. At the head of the table, Robert stood silently, his broad shoulders slumped in defeat, a stark contrast to the man he used to be. His face, once marked by self-assurance, now wore the lines of regret and fear. Michael entered the room quietly, and all eyes turned to him. "Michael," Olivia said softly, relief mingling with despair. "I'm so glad you're here. We were on the brink, and I don't know what to do." Before anyone could speak further, Robert cleared his throat. His voice, though shaky, was firm. "I have always prided myself on my ability to succeed, on making the right decisions," he began. "But I have reached a point where the situation has spiraled beyond my control. I am on the verge of bankruptcy." A heavy silence followed his admission. Linda's eyes welled with tears, and Olivia's hands gripped the edges of the table. Michael's heart pounded in his chest. The father of the bride, once so imperious and dismissive of others, was now laid bare by his own misfortune. Michael felt a surge of sympathy and determination. He had learned firsthand from his father's unwavering kindness and resilience the lessons of integrity and strength in adversity. Despite the bitter memories of the wedding, he knew that no family was beyond redemption, and that pride was no match for true compassion. "Dad," Michael said, his tone gentle but resolute, "we're not here to judge or to cast blame. We're family. And family helps each other, no matter what." Robert looked up, surprise and skepticism mingling in his eyes. "You would help me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded. "Yes. And so will Dad." He glanced toward Samuel, whose kind eyes met his with quiet assurance. "We can't let old grudges keep us from doing what is right." Samuel leaned forward, his voice warm and steady. "I have known hardship my whole life, and I have seen the value of a helping hand in times of need. I understand the weight of regret and the sting of loss. But it is not too late to rebuild. Let us put aside our differences and work together." Robert's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he took in the sincerity of their words. I never imagined that you would come to my aid after all that has happened. I thought you would always remember the way my pride cast me aside." Michael stepped closer, placing a firm hand on his father's shoulder. "We all have our moments of weakness, Dad. The past is behind us. What matters now is how we move forward. Let us focus on finding a solution instead of dwelling on what has been." Over the next several weeks, the atmosphere at the company headquarters shifted from one of desolation to one of cautious hope. Michael and Samuel spent long hours with Robert, poring over financial records, consulting experts, and brainstorming ways to stabilize the faltering business. Slowly but surely, a plan began to emerge, a bold strategy to restructure the company, cut unnecessary expenses, and diversify its investments. Michael, drawing on his recent promotion and newfound confidence at work, reached out to his network of colleagues and industry contacts. He arranged meetings with potential investors and advisors who had once respected his father's acumen. Samuel, despite his humble job, offered practical wisdom and a level-headed perspective that reminded everyone that sometimes the simplest solutions were the best. His calm demeanor and unfaltering belief in hard work became a guiding light during the dark days that followed. One late evening in the conference room, after hours of intense discussion, Robert finally allowed himself to smile, a small, tentative smile that spoke of hope rather than triumph. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be relying on the kindness of those I once looked down upon," he admitted softly. "But here we are." Olivia, who had been quietly supportive throughout the process, joined the conversation. "We all make mistakes," she said gently. "It's not about what we once were, it's about what we can become. We have a chance now to rebuild not just a business, but also our relationships and our future." As autumn deepened into winter, the trio worked tirelessly to implement their plan. They met with accountants and financial strategists, revised budgets, and even rebranded certain divisions of the company to appeal to a broader market. Michael found himself negotiating with clients and investors with a newfound assertiveness, while Samuel's practical advice became a trusted resource in navigating the complexities of restructuring. Despite the challenges, the process brought the family closer together. Late-night discussions over cups of lukewarm coffee turned into heartfelt confessions and moments of shared vulnerability. Robert began to acknowledge the errors of his past, his pride, his dismissive attitude toward those he once deemed inferior, and slowly, he started to change. The transformation was neither swift nor dramatic, but it was steady and genuine. Months passed, and winter gave way to a bright, hopeful spring. The company's financial outlook began to improve, thanks in no small part to the joint efforts of Robert, Michael, and Samuel. Investors, impressed by the turnaround and the transparency of the new management, started to return. The once ailing business was gradually transformed into a leaner, more innovative enterprise. In a symbolic gesture of reconciliation and new beginnings, Robert invited Michael, Samuel, and Olivia to a celebratory dinner at his renovated home, a modest mansion that had once been a symbol of his unassailable success, but which now stood as a reminder of how fragile that success could be. The house, freshly painted and filled with warm light, buzzed with quiet excitement as family and friends gathered to toast the rebirth of a legacy. Over dinner, conversations flowed easily as everyone recounted the trials of the past months and the lessons learned along the way. Even Linda, who had long shared in Robert's former disdain, softened her tone as she listened to Samuel recount a humorous anecdote from his days as a custodian at the high school. The old wounds were not forgotten, but they were being healed by the passage of time and the transformative power of empathy and understanding. At one point, as the clink of glasses and gentle laughter filled the room, Robert rose to speak. His voice, though still tinged with regret, carried a note of sincere gratitude. "I want to thank each of you," he began, his eyes meeting those of Michael and Samuel, for reminding me that true strength is not found in pride or wealth, but in the bonds we share as family. I was so blinded by my arrogance that I forgot what truly matters. I owe you my future, and for that, I am forever grateful." Michael's eyes shone with pride, and Samuel's weathered face broke into a gentle smile. Olivia reached for her father's hand, and together, they forged a silent pact. No matter how hard the road might become, they would always stand together. Just as the company began to regain its footing, life presented yet another unexpected challenge. A rival firm, sensing vulnerability, attempted a hostile takeover. Rumors began to swirl in the business community, and the media caught wind of the controversy. Overnight, the spotlight shifted again, and Robert found himself at the center of a renewed maelstrom of scrutiny and criticism. It was a trying time. Investors demanded answers, and employees looked to their leaders for reassurance. In the midst of the chaos, Robert's old habits threatened to resurface: hesitation, pride, and an unwillingness to admit fault. But this time, Michael and Samuel were there, steadfast and unwavering. "Dad, we need to be honest and transparent," Michael urged during one tense meeting. "We have nothing to hide. Now is the time to show everyone that we have learned from our mistakes." Samuel added quietly, "It is not the crisis that defines us, but how we respond to it." Together, they prepared a series of press conferences and internal meetings aimed at calming the storm. Michael, with his articulate manner and earnest conviction, addressed the media with clarity and candor. He explained the steps they had taken to restructure the business, to streamline operations, and to refocus on ethical practices. His words resonated with a public tired of corporate arrogance and scandal. Robert, for his part, took responsibility for the missteps of the past. In a heartfelt address at a shareholders' meeting, he admitted, "I was once blinded by my own pride. I thought I could control everything, but the truth is, we are all fallible. I am here now, not as a man who expects forgiveness without effort, but as one who is determined to rebuild and learn from his mistakes." His sincerity, coupled with the unwavering support of his son and Samuel, began to restore confidence in the company. The rival firm's hostile takeover attempt faltered as investors saw the strength and unity of the reformed leadership. Slowly, trust was rebuilt. With time, the crisis passed, and the company emerged even stronger, a testament to the transformative power of vulnerability and collaboration. In the months that followed, as the business recovered and the wounds of the past began to heal, the family took time to reflect on the tumultuous journey they had endured together. They met on quiet afternoons in the garden of Robert's renovated home, where the blooming roses and lush greenery seemed to echo the promise of renewal. During one such afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Olivia sat with her parents and Michael on the back porch. The conversation turned reflective as they shared memories of the wedding, the pain, the pride, and ultimately, the redemption that had followed. Robert, his voice gentle, said, "I used to believe that wealth and status were the only measures of success. I thought that by elevating myself above others, I could achieve greatness. But I now see that greatness lies in compassion, humility, and the willingness to admit when you are wrong." Michael squeezed his father's hand. "Dad, you're stronger than you realize. It takes real courage to change, to let go of old habits, and to learn from your failures. I'm proud of you for taking those steps." Samuel, ever the quiet sage, added, "True success isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you give back, and how you lift others up when they're in need. I have seen both of you change in ways that make me hopeful for the future. This is the legacy that matters." As twilight deepened into night, the family sat together in comfortable silence, united by a shared understanding that life's challenges were not obstacles to be feared, but opportunities to grow and to come together as one. In time, The experience became a turning point for not only Robert's business, but for the entire family. The painful lessons of the past were transformed into the building blocks of a new future, one based on honesty, collaboration, and the unbreakable bond of family. Robert began to invest more in his employees, fostering an environment where innovation and ethical practices were paramount. He introduced mentorship programs and opened up channels of communication that had once been stifled by his domineering nature. Slowly, the culture of the company shifted, and with it, the respect of the community. Michael's career flourished as he took on greater responsibilities within the newly restructured organization. His reputation as a fair, empathetic leader grew, and he often recalled the lessons he had learned from both his father and Samuel. At board meetings and industry conferences, he spoke of integrity, resilience, and the importance of supporting those who had fallen on hard times. Samuel, too, experienced a quiet transformation. Though he continued his work as a custodian at the local high school, he found himself increasingly sought after for advice on leadership and character. In quiet moments, he would reflect on the winding path that had led him from a life marked by hardship and prejudice to one defined by dignity and compassion. His legacy, once measured solely by the labor he performed, had grown immeasurably in the hearts of those who knew him. Even Linda, who had once shared in Robert's haughty dismissal of others, began to soften. The turbulence of the crisis had forced her to confront the consequences of unchecked arrogance. In hushed conversations with Olivia, she admitted, "I realize now that I was wrong to look down on others. I see the error of my ways, and I want to change." Although the road to redemption would be long, her willingness to reflect and learn offered hope for a more inclusive future. One crisp spring morning, several years after the crisis had been averted, the family gathered once more, this time for a celebration of renewal and reconciliation. The occasion was not a grand corporate gala or an extravagant party, but a simple, heartfelt picnic held in a sprawling park on the outskirts of town. The sun shone brightly overhead as laughter filled the air, and the warmth of human connection bridged the gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. Robert, Michael, Samuel, Olivia, and even Linda sat together on a checkered blanket, surrounded by friends and colleagues who had witnessed their journey firsthand. The atmosphere was light, yet beneath the merriment lay the steady pulse of gratitude and growth. As they shared food, stories, and gentle humor, Robert took a moment to reflect aloud. "I have learned that no matter how far one falls, there is always a way to rise again if you are willing to accept help and change your ways. I am deeply thankful for the forgiveness and support that Michael and Samuel showed me when I needed it most. It has changed me, and I hope to spend the rest of my days living up to that second chance." Michael, with a warm smile, added, "Our family is stronger now because we embraced our vulnerabilities and chose to help each other instead of clinging to old grudges. I know that no matter what challenges we face, we will always have each other as backs." Samuel's gentle voice carried wisdom as he concluded, "Let this be a reminder that true strength lies not in wealth or status, but in our ability to love, to forgive, and to build a future together. May our legacy be measured not in what we have accumulated, but in what we have given to the world." The picnic ended with hugs, heartfelt toasts, and promises to keep building something better not only for themselves, but for all who had been touched by their journey. The park, bathed in the soft glow of a setting sun, bore witness to the transformation of hearts and the healing power of unity. If you enjoyed this story, please support our channel by subscribing, clicking the bell to not miss new releases, and sharing this video with your friends and family. Thank you for being with us.